Resident Evil 2. You have once again stepped into the world of survival horror. Good luck. Welcome back all to our marathon of Resident Evil game reviews. Today we'll be taking a look into the sequel to the first game in the franchise, Resident Evil 2. Not to be confused with the 2019 remake, this 1998 tank controlling classic is the title that cemented Resident Evil as a household survival horror franchise. Let's have a look at what this game is about and see what its true score is gonna be. In case you're one of the few that hasn't played the 2019 remake, I'll give you a basic rundown of what the game is about. 2 months have passed since the events of the first game, and in this one, you play as rookie cop Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield, little sister of Chris from the first game. Both characters wind up in Raccoon City as it's at the tail end of being completely overrun by a new zombie virus called the G-Virus. Clearly Umbrella is up to some shady shenanigans again, and it's up to our new heroes to put an end to it and escape the mess they've gotten tangled up in. In Resident Evil 2, you're going to be doing a lot of what you did in the first game, so I'll skim over it. You'll be going room to room finding resources like health and ammo, solving puzzles for key items, picking up files and notes left around for lore and backstory on the events prior to the game, and killing whatever you can't run past or avoid altogether. From the start, it's pretty apparent that this game wants to lean a fair bit more into the action side of things than its predecessor, and I will say, it pulls it off nicely. Characters and enemies are a lot faster, movement is more snappy, the gunplay feels tighter, and there are actual set pieces that happen throughout the game to give it the most cinematic feel that a game from 1998 could. The intro of the game does a great job of really highlighting these changes, giving you narrow hallways and a hell of a lot of enemies to either dodge past, shoot your way through, or die trying. And yeah, it's not hard to say you might die in the intro if you're not prepared for what this game is going to throw at you. You might be thinking, if player movement and combat have all been improved, how do you keep challenging the game? Answer is, a shitload more enemies than anything you've seen before. There were a number of times I walked blindly into a new room only to find out there were like 5 to 10 zombies in there, and you better be shooting the second the screen loads or you are getting grabbed. Enemy groups of 2 to 3 are pretty standard here, which was something you only rarely dealt with in the first game. The boss fights are a lot tougher in this game too, but not really in a good way. They mostly come down to trial and error repetition until you find whatever cheesy strat works, rather than having good movement and resource management. Both playable characters have someone that routinely shows up throughout their playthrough, and you can even control at some points. The lustrous Ada Wong accompanies Leon on his journey, and Claire is joined by the young Sherry Birkin. Ada is fun to play, but unfortunately Sherry is not. She's slow and can't fight back against anything, so you can totally die as her to bad RNG. The focus on bigger action makes a lot of sense once the credits roll and you see that the director is none other than Hideki Kamiya, a man who went on to pioneer a whole new genre of action games with Devil May Cry. It's not all action all the time though. I actually think this game is more successful with the horror aspects than the first game. The setting plays a big part here. Most of the game takes place in the Raccoon City Police Department, which has been completely overtaken by zombies and whatever areas lie beneath the station, such as a sewer which contains even more monstrosities. You'll end up spending around half of your playtime in the police station, so it's a good thing that this place feels claustrophobic and haunting. Even when you've been through a room multiple times, the feeling of unease never really passes. This is actually emphasised in the second playthrough, as a trenchcoat wearing tyrant is stalking you through the station, and you never really know when Mr. X is going to bust down a wall to give it to you. The pre-rendered backgrounds hold up, and it's a joy going from area to area and coming up against the horrors in them. If you remember the way too cheesy live action scenes from the first game, you'll either be glad or sorely disappointed to see that Capcom opted to go for CG cutscenes this time, but with them being as dated as they are, they have their own unique charm to them. The sound design is a notable step up from the first game. There's a lot more ambient music here and none of it is fun in any way. It really helps to make sure the player is in a constant state of unease. Enemy sounds are great, and you know what you're going to be fighting the moment you walk into a room because you can hear and recognise their movements and sounds from the other side of the room. The player itself is a good source of scares, thanks to good sound design too. There are a lot of broken things on the ground, like glass shards and different kinds of surfaces that all sound different as you run over them, and I had to double take a couple of times as I ran over something and thought the noise was an enemy I hadn't noticed. Enemy design is good on the whole here. Most of the designs from the first game have returned, such as your typical zombies, the zombie dogs, and giant spiders, but there are some additions to the roster. Hunters have been swapped out for a new enemy type called the Licker, which I personally think are more enjoyable to fight and can hit you from a distance. There's a new kind of plant monster to fight too, but I wasn't as big on these ones. The range on their acid spit is huge, and they can very quickly become a run ender. The tyrant called Mr. X is an amazing addition to the roster, a hulking, emotionless man monster that stalks you through your journey. But he becomes kinda trivial when you realise that every encounter is just run past him to the door and exit. Resident Evil 2 is a little shorter than the first game. Your first playthrough is going to take a rough 5 to 7 hours before the credits roll, but this is where a fun, innovative system comes into play, called the zapping system. It's a little tricky to explain if you haven't played it, but there are 2 alternate story scenarios here, and each one has an A and a B playthrough, which denotes which character goes through the areas first. For example, I played Leon A, meaning he went through the areas before Claire got there. Then after beating that, played Claire B, which capped off the story for the first scenario. After that, there is a whole new scenario going through Claire A and Leon B. Every playthrough, items and enemy placements were different, so even if I played the one game 4 times, each playthrough felt different. There are also some extra scenarios where you can play as a block of tofu or a soldier known only as Hunk if you play the game multiple times with the highest rankings you can get, but I don't really have the gumption for that. Point being anyway, that the main story itself might be short, but this game has a hell of a lot of replay value. One thing I did notice was that this entry is a lot more linear than the original game. There's still a lot of exploration and backtracking to use newly found items in old rooms or unlock ones that you couldn't before, but from about the halfway point in the story, it's pretty much just a long home stretch until the final area of the game. This causes the pacing to be a little funky, and the game feels really front-loaded. It is an incredibly fun first half, but that just brings attention to how much the second half doesn't compete after subsequent playthroughs. So all in all, this game has a lot of highs, but a few lows too. Resident Evil 2 is a survival horror classic, and I can see why, but there are just a few too many problems to stop it from hitting a perfect score. Annoying trial and error boss fights, a side character that's kinda bad to play, and a linear second half missing the puzzles and exploration we love the series for, all detract from what would otherwise be damn near perfection. After a lot of thought, and I don't take this lightly so don't burn down my home with pitchforks and torches, I'm going to be giving Resident Evil 2 a true score of 8.5 out of 10. We have plenty more Resident Evil games to review next, and even some other projects coming up, so if you've made it this far, you're gonna have to sub. We don't want you missing out. It doesn't cost anything, and if you don't like the content, you can unsubscribe at any time. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good one, guys. Catch ya.